Hello, this is Mike Lambert, Executive Director of the Distance Education and Training Council, or DETC. I'm sitting here today in the conference room of DETC, and I thought I would take just a few minutes to give you a quick introduction to the offices of DETC and a little bit of history about our fine organization. DETC started out as the National Home Study Council back in 1926 with a grant from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. DETC has always been located in Washington, D.C., and where I'm sitting today in these offices, we moved in here in 1961 and have been here ever since. At the offices here in DETC, we have a library, and then we have 6 staff who work daily in conducting the accrediting program of the DETC and the other activities that we engage in. So join me for a very quick tour of the headquarters of DETC in Washington, D.C. Let's begin our little history tour of the council with a look at the 5 previous executive directors of DETC. The first was the founding executive director, Dr. John S. Nofsinger. Dr. Nofsinger was a young researcher back in the 1920s, and he got himself a grant from the Carnegie Corporation to do research on all of the correspondence schools in the United States at that time. Following this research project, he wrote a book, and then he brought all of the schools together and formed what was called then the National Home Study Council. And the council was started then in 1926 here in Washington, D.C., with John Nofsinger as its first executive director. Dr. Nofsinger remained executive director until 1952, when we entered a new era, and the second executive director right here, Dr. Homer Kempfer, joined us as the director. Dr. Kempfer came to us from the Office of Education of the United States government, and he was with us from 1952 to 1959. His mark on the council was the writing of all of the standards for the Accrediting Commission. He actually worked diligently to get the Accrediting Commission established in 1955, and subsequently in 1959, the National Home Study Council was formally recognized by the then U.S. Commissioner of Education, and that marked the beginning of our federal recognition, and we owe all of that to Dr. Kempfer and his colleagues' work back in the 1950s. Our third executive director was Dr. M. Robert Allen. Dr. Allen joined us in 1959 and moved on from the council in 1961. He was a PT boat commander in World War II and did a lot of writing himself and moved the council along to the next level before leaving us in 1961. This is Dr. David Lockmiller. Dr. Lockmiller was a college president. He was the president of the University of Chattanooga and also of Ohio Wesleyan College. He joined the council as director in 1961 and retired in 1972. He was a scholar, author of a best-selling book called Scholars on Parade, also a book on a judge named Blackstone, and quite a famous fellow in his own right, and was with us throughout the 1960s, and quite a fine Southern gentleman. The fifth executive director was Mr. William A. Fowler. Mr. Fowler joined the council staff in 1961 and served as assistant director, and then when Dr. Lockmiller retired in 1972, Mr. Fowler was appointed executive director. He served as executive director from 1972 to his retirement in 1992. I came aboard the council in 1972, and I was on Mr. Fowler's staff until 1992 when I was appointed executive director. But I did spend 20 years at his side. I learned a lot from Mr. Fowler, and I'm always grateful for what he has taught me during that time. So there you have it. Only 5 previous executive directors, and before yours truly, since 1926. So that's quite a bit of stability. On the wall behind me is what we think is the first advertisement for a correspondence school in the United States. It was taken out in the Boston Gazette in March of 1728, and it's an advertisement for a shorthand course that was taught by penny postcards. And so people learned to do shorthand using their Bibles at home and translating passages and mailing them in to the school in Boston. And the owner of the school was named Caleb Phillips. So the correspondence school movement in the United States, we think, dates back to at least 1728. As you may know, the correspondence school movement does date back to the late 19th century. And the first DETC member school was founded in 1890. It was then called the International Correspondence Schools, or ICS, and today it's known as the Penn Foster Schools in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is interesting because these are actual spark plugs from an engine fitted to what was called the ICS monoplane that toured around Great Britain in 1912 on an aerial show and tell tour of ICS. So here we have some 1912 airplane spark plugs, and this is how they marketed ICS in Great Britain in 1912. And I'd like to show you now some correspondence school texts that date back well over 100 years. This is a hardbound, perfectly bound textbook from International Correspondence Schools from 1900. And it's applied mechanics and machine design. And we have on the shelf here dozens and dozens of these textbooks, and they are beautifully bound, beautifully printed, and contain lots and lots of copy and content in them. And it was said that you could rebuild the Western world with the ICS textbooks of 1900. If all the libraries in the world had been destroyed, and if you had these books, you could probably rebuild society using them. So our history does go back a long, long time. Since 1890, when the first school was launched, we estimate that over 130 million Americans have taken programs and courses from DETC member institutions. That's quite a contribution to our society when you can say that 130 million people have studied with your institutions. I thought I would point out something we found in our archives. It is dated June 12th, 1900, and it is a letter from a teacher to one of his students congratulating him on the work that he did. And here is the original note written to that student from June 1900. It shows that we still had interactive communications with students back then, over 110 years ago. And by the way, the penmanship in this note is flawless. It's just great to look at. So here's a 1900 letter from a teacher at the International Correspondence Schools in Scranton to one of his students. Here we have the DETC Hall of Fame plaque. On this plaque are inscribed the names of 45 men and women who helped launch the council and then sustained it over the years. And these folks, their histories go back to the 1890s coming forward, and they are the people who gave of their lives and their professional careers to develop and nurture the DETC to bring it to the point where it is today. So we're very proud of our history, and the shoulders we stand on are the men and women whose names are permanently inscribed on our Hall of Fame plaque. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this little tour of the DETC headquarters office. We wanted you to feel that you are part of an organization that has a long, long history, that has helped millions and millions of people achieve a better life. We want you to feel that you are part of a great historic legacy, a legacy that dates back for decades in this country, that you are part of an organization that has stability and has a forward-looking vision as well. And it's been just a pleasure and privilege for me personally to have devoted the last 38 years of my life of service to the Distance Education and Training Council. If you're ever in Washington, please let us know in advance. We'd love to have you come by to get a first-hand tour of your headquarters. Thanks very much for joining us today.